There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when the person you built it with has decided it no longer belongs to you. Not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who know each other so well they don't need to fill every second with words. This was the other kind. The kind that has teeth. The kind that hums underneath every room like a low electrical current you can feel but cannot see. I had been living inside that silence for 11 months before the night everything ended. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 53 years old. For 22 of those years, I was a husband. For the last 11 months of that, I was a fool. The difference between those two things, I have since learned, is not as wide as a man would like to believe. I want to tell you about the night I burned it all down. Not literally, I am not a man given to fire or theatrics. But there are ways to burn a life, ways that leave no ash, no smoke, no evidence. Just an empty space where something used to stand. And if you have ever loved someone who used that love as a weapon, if you have ever looked across a dinner table at the person who was supposed to be your partner and felt like a stranger sitting in your own kitchen, hit that like button. Because what I am about to tell you is for you. It started on a Wednesday. I know it was a Wednesday because Wednesday was the night Claire had her wine-tasting club, or so I had believed for the better part of 8 months. I came home early that evening. A meeting had been canceled. The kind of meeting that anchors your whole afternoon, and when it fell apart at 3 o'clock, I found myself standing on the sidewalk outside my office building in downtown Charlotte with nowhere to be until 7. I decided to go home, cook dinner, maybe open a bottle of the Bordeaux we had been saving since our anniversary trip to France the previous spring. I remember thinking it would be a nice surprise. I remember thinking that as I turned my key in the front door lock. The house was not empty. I heard the laughter before I saw anything. Low, comfortable laughter. The kind that belongs to people who have been laughing together for a very long time. I set my briefcase down in the entryway, my hand still on the strap, my body performing the ordinary motions of coming home while my mind processed the sound and tried to make it make sense. I walked through the hallway toward the kitchen. The laughter was coming from the back patio. And there, through the glass doors that opened onto the deck I had built with my own hands 3 summers ago, I saw Claire. She was sitting in one of the teak chairs. Her legs were folded beneath her in the way she used to sit when we were first married. Before she told me she had developed back problems and needed the proper lumbar support of the straight-backed chairs, she insisted we replace our old ones with. She was holding a glass of our Bordeaux. The good one, the one I had been waiting for. She was not alone. The man sitting across from her was named Marcus Webb. I knew this because Claire had spoken his name before, in the careful way people say the names of things they are trying to minimize. My college friend Marcus. Marcus from back home. Marcus is in town for work. Each mention its own small stone placed in the architecture of a lie she was still building, one stone at a time, assuming I would never stand far enough back to see the shape it was taking. He was younger than me. Perhaps 40, with the easy confidence of a man who has always understood himself to be attractive. He was leaning forward in his chair with his elbows on his knees, talking, and Claire was watching his face the way she used to watch mine. I stood at the glass door for longer than I should have. Long enough to see her reach across and touch his wrist when he said something that made her laugh. Long enough to see the way her whole body leaned toward him, pulled by some invisible gravity. Long enough to understand that what I was looking at was not a friendship I had been too suspicious to recognize. What I was looking at was a decision she had already made. I stepped back from the glass door. I walked back down the hallway. I picked up my briefcase. I let myself out the front door. And I sat in my car in the driveway of my own house for 22 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, and I did not feel the thing I would have expected to feel. I did not feel rage. I did not feel the urge to go back inside and throw open that glass door and demand an explanation. I felt something colder than that, something quieter. I felt the gears of my mind begin to turn. I drove to a hotel that night. I told Claire I had an out-of-town client dinner that had run late and it was easier to just stay downtown. She texted back a single word, okay, no question mark. No, hope your dinner went well. Just a period at the end of a door closing. I lay on the hotel bed in the dark and I thought about 22 years. I thought about the apartment we rented when we were 29, the one with the broken radiator that clanged all through January and February, and how we used to lie in bed laughing about it because it was all we could afford, but it felt like the beginning of something magnificent. I thought about our son, Tyler, who was 19 now and studying architecture at Georgia Tech, with the focused intensity of a young man who has always known exactly who he wants to be. I thought about the house I built, the business I grew, the retirement accounts I had been quietly and carefully filling for a decade. And I thought about Marcus Webb sitting in my teak chair drinking my wine. I want to be honest with you about what I decided that night, because I think honesty is the only thing I have left to offer. I did not decide to fight, not in the way most men in my position would fight. I did not decide to storm back into the house and make a scene that would send Claire into defensive mode and give her lawyers a narrative to use against me. I did not decide to confront Marcus Webb in a restaurant parking lot or send him threatening messages that could be screenshot and submitted as evidence. I decided to disappear, not immediately. Immediately would have been too obvious, too emotional, too traceable. No. I decided to disappear slowly, methodically, the way a man who has spent 25 years in financial planning understands how to move things without making noise. I want to be clear. I am not a vindictive man by nature. I was raised by a father who told me that the best revenge was a life lived without the person who wronged you, and for most of my life I thought that was a beautiful, noble philosophy. What I eventually understood was that he was only half right. The best revenge is a life lived without the person who wronged you, and without the ability for them to reach back into that life and take anything else. I went to see my financial planner the next morning. His name is Gordon Park. I have known Gordon for 18 years. I told him I was considering some restructuring, long-term stuff. He did not ask why. Gordon never asks why. It is one of the reasons I trust him. Over the following 3 months, Gordon and I began the quiet, legal, entirely above-board process of restructuring the elements of my financial life that Claire's divorce attorney might otherwise reach into. I had built my wealth through my firm, Mercer Capital Advisors, which operated as an LLC. The value of the firm, as any competent divorce attorney would tell you, would be subject to equitable distribution in a North Carolina divorce. What a less competent attorney might not immediately identify was the precise way I had structured the operating agreements, the ownership of the client accounts, the vesting schedules for my partners. Gordon and I did not do anything improper. We did not hide assets. We restructured. We documented everything correctly. We simply made sure that what was mine, what I had built through 15 years of client relationships and personal reputation, was not going to evaporate into a settlement check because my wife had decided she preferred the company of her college boyfriend. At the same time, I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Allo. She had the reputation in Charlotte family law circles of being surgical, thorough, and completely without sentimentality. The first thing she said to me when I sat down in her office was, "Do not move out of the marital home. Do not stop paying the household expenses. Do not do anything that can be characterized later as abandonment or financial misconduct." I nodded. I had already figured this much out, and don't tell her you know. I nodded again. I went home that evening and I had dinner with my wife. She had made pasta. The kitchen smelled like garlic and olive oil and the particular warmth of a woman who had decided she was a good wife because she had cooked a meal. She asked about my day. I told her it was fine. I asked about hers. She said she had lunch with a girlfriend, went to the gym, picked up dry cleaning. There was no mention of Marcus. I looked at her across the table. Claire is 49 years old and still striking in the way of a woman who has always known it, who has built a kind of armor out of her appearance. Dark hair, careful style, the particular expression of someone who is performing pleasantness from a great distance. I smiled at her. I asked if she wanted the rest of my wine. She said yes and poured it herself. I watched her and I thought, she does not know that I know. She does not know that anything has changed. She believes she is sitting across from the same Daniel Mercer she married, the one who would be devastated by this information, the one who would crumble or explode or do something that she could use. She believes she has time. She had 30 days. If you have ever had to perform normalcy while everything underneath you is shifting, you know what those weeks felt like. I went to work. I came home. I asked about her day. I had dinners with her and lunches with Gordon and quiet, methodical conversations with Patricia. And every night I went to bed beside the woman I was married to, and I thought about what she was throwing away, and I felt nothing where the grief should have been. That scared me more than anything. Not the betrayal itself, but the discovery that I had already been grieving something for a long time before I knew what it was. The children of long marriages sometimes say that the end of one is like the death of a person who has already been gone for years. You mourn the absence, not the departure. By the time the departure happens, you have already grieved yourself hollow. I understood that now. I was hollow, and the silence in the house had been the sound of that hollowness all along. On a Tuesday evening in March, Claire went to her wine-tasting club again. I waited 90 minutes, then I drove to the address Patricia's investigator had identified 2 weeks prior. It was a hotel 6 miles from our home. A mid-range chain business hotel, the kind with a restaurant that closes at 9 and a bar that stays open until 11. The kind of place a man staying for a week on business might choose. I did not go inside. I sat in the parking lot and I looked at the building and I thought, so this is where it happens. I drove home. I made tea. I fed the dog. I went to bed before Claire got home. The next morning I called Patricia and told her I was ready. She said, "Are you certain?" I said, "I have been certain for 11 months. I just didn't know it yet." Here is the part that people always ask about when they hear this story. They want to know about the confrontation. They imagine that there must have been a moment, a great operatic showdown in the kitchen, raised voices. Perhaps a door slammed hard enough to shake the frame, tears, accusations, the whole theater of betrayal that makes for satisfying cinema. There was none of that. There was only a Sunday morning in April when I came downstairs and found Claire at the kitchen island in her robe with her coffee, scrolling her phone, and I sat down across from her and I said, in the same tone I would use to mention that I needed to stop for gas, "Claire, I want to talk to you about our marriage." She looked up. Something shifted behind her eyes, not guilt exactly. More like the adjustment a person makes when they realize the terrain has changed and they are not sure yet which direction to move in. "What about it?" she said. "I want a divorce," I said. "Patricia Allo has already drawn up the papers. They will be served to your attorney this week." She set down her coffee cup, very slowly, the way a person moves when they are trying to control what their hands are doing. "Daniel," she said, "I am not angry," I said, "and this was true. I want you to understand that this was true. I am not interested in a war. I am not interested in humiliating you or making this painful. Tyler is 19. He does not need to watch his parents destroy each other. I have been fair in the settlement proposal. Patricia will confirm that. I think you should call your attorney today." She stared at me for a long moment. And I will carry this moment with me for the rest of my life. She leaned back in her chair and she did something I had not expected. She smiled. It was a slow smile, confident, the smile of a person who has run the calculations and come up with a number they are satisfied with. "Daniel," she said, "we have been married 22 years. I am entitled to half of everything. Half of the firm, half of the retirement accounts, half of this house. You can file whatever papers you want, but you are not going to want to sit across from me in a courtroom and have Patricia Allo explain to a judge what half of your net worth looks like." She picked up her coffee again, took a sip. "I think," she said, "that you are going to find this is a great deal more expensive than you think it is." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had made a life with, sitting in the house I had built, wearing a robe I had given her for Christmas 3 years ago, telling me that the bill for her betrayal was now due and I was the one who would be paying it. I nodded slowly. "You might be right," I said. "I suppose we will see." I got up, rinsed my cup, and went upstairs to finish packing the bag I had been quietly preparing for a week. Here is what Claire's attorney did not know. Here is what the smile at the kitchen island did not account for. For 15 years, Mercer Capital Advisors had been my business, my name. My client relationships built one handshake at a time, one long phone call at a time, one crisis managed, and one portfolio protected at a time. When a divorce attorney looks at a privately held advisory firm and begins calculating its value, they look at its assets under management, its revenue, its profitability. What they are looking for is a number. What Gordon and I had spent 3 months building was a structure in which that number was considerably harder to arrive at than it appeared. 16 months before that Sunday morning, I had brought in 2 junior partners. Their equity stakes had been restructured. Client relationships had been formally documented as belonging to the firm's practice groups rather than to any individual advisor, which in practical terms meant that the dissolution of any one partner's ownership interest would not liquidate those relationships. They would remain with the firm. The firm's operating agreement, which had been rewritten with the help of a business attorney Patricia recommended, contained a clause specifying that any court-ordered transfer of ownership interests would trigger a buyout formula based on a rolling 3-year average of adjusted EBITDA, not on assets under management. In plain English, the number Claire's attorney was going to walk into that courtroom with was not the number she was going to walk out with. Patricia had gone over this with me 4 times, slowly and carefully, because she wanted to be certain I understood both what was possible and what was not. There were things we could do, and things we could not. We had done the things we could do. The rest was a matter of documentation, patience, and the particular advantage that belongs to the person who has been thinking about something for 11 months, while the other party has been thinking about something else entirely. I am not telling you that Claire got nothing. That is not what happened, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I am telling you is that she did not get the lottery ticket she had been expecting to cash. Tyler found out about the divorce through me. I called him on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the papers were filed, and I told him plainly and without drama what was happening. He was quiet for a long time. Tyler is a young man of considerable interior life and very measured expression, which he did not get from me. "Did you know for a long time?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. "Are you okay, Dad?" And here is the thing about that question. Here is the thing I was not expecting. In all the months of calculations and legal preparations and financial restructuring and performance of normalcy, I was not expecting the way my throat would tighten when my son asked me if I was okay, with exactly the same tone my father used to use, that particular male gentleness that tries to make itself small because it does not want to overwhelm. "I'm going to be," I said, and I meant it. I left Charlotte in June, not running, not fleeing. I left the way a man leaves a place he has outgrown, with his boxes properly labeled and his forwarding address filed correctly and his goodbyes said to the people who mattered. I moved to Asheville. I had always loved the mountains in a way the city never quite satisfied, and Patricia had found me a house there during the proceedings, a quiet place on 2 acres with a porch that looked out over a ridge of blue-green hills. I set up a satellite office for the firm. Gordon helped me with the financial consolidation. I got a dog, a large, serious-looking dog named Grant who did not suffer nonsense and had, I felt, exactly the right energy for a man starting over in his 50s. Claire kept the house in Charlotte. This was part of the settlement. She also kept the furniture which she had chosen and the art, most of which I had never liked. What she did not keep was what she had been counting on keeping. I heard through Tyler, who maintained a careful neutrality on the subject of his parents' finances that I deeply respected, that Claire's attorney had told her the settlement was, in his words, less favorable than anticipated. I heard that there had been some unpleasantness about the firm's valuation. I heard that Marcus Webb had relocated back to Atlanta for work, and that the particular arrangement that had seemed so full of promise on my teak deck in the spring had not survived the complications of a contested divorce. I did not ask for details. It was not my business anymore. There is a morning I want to tell you about. It was a Tuesday in September, 4 months after I left Charlotte. I was sitting on the porch of my house in Asheville with my first cup of coffee, watching the fog sit in the valley below the ridge the way it does in the early morning there, thick and still and lit from somewhere inside itself by the coming sun. Grant was asleep at my feet. The only sound was birds. I had a call with Tyler at 9. He was coming to visit the following weekend, and he wanted to know if I had a good hiking trail he could take his girlfriend on. His girlfriend's name is Sophie, and she studies environmental engineering, and Tyler talks about her with a careful, deliberate understatement that tells me everything I need to know. I thought about my father's philosophy, a life lived without the person who wronged you. I thought about what I would add to it now from the other side. A life lived without the person who wronged you, and in the full knowledge of what you built, what you protected, what you refused to let them take. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge for its own sake, but because the things you built with the better years of your life deserve to still be standing when those years are over. What Veronica, what Claire, what any of them do not understand when they look at a man who has been quiet and patient and seemingly accommodating is that quiet is not the same as empty. Patience is not the same as surrender. A man who does not raise his voice in the kitchen is not a man who has given up. Sometimes he is a man who already won. The fog had burned off by 8. Grant woke up and looked at me with the expression of a dog who has decided it is time for a walk and is communicating this through the dignity of prolonged eye contact. I stood up. My knees ached a little the way knees do when you are in your 50s and the morning is cool. I looked out at the ridge, which was green and indifferent and magnificent. I picked up my coffee cup. I thought about the wine I never got to open, and then I did something I had not done in 11 months of silence and maneuvering and careful, controlled grief. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not the laugh of a man who has beaten someone and wants them to know it. Just the laugh of a man standing on a porch in the mountains, looking at the blue hills, understanding finally that the life he is living right now, the dog at his feet, and the son who is coming next weekend, and the fog burning off the valley and the coffee going cold in his hand, is not the consolation prize. It is the thing he was building toward all along. He just had to clear some wreckage to get to it. If you have ever had to burn something down to find out what was worth saving, leave a comment below. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the most elegant exit is the one where you don't look back. Not because you are indifferent, but because there is nothing behind you worth the turn.